All right, welcome to the Sweet Science of Fighting podcast. Today we have another Dutch Olympic Committee coach, Matt Solomon. How are you?
I'm good, mate. I'm good. Thank you very much for inviting me.
No, thank you for coming out. Obviously, if anyone's listening to the previous podcast, we had Casper de Witt. He was on, maybe a month or two ago now, and he's obviously created our judo strength conditioning program too, so you can check that out. But to keep it within the Dutch family here as well, do you want to maybe introduce yourself, Matt, maybe a little bit of what you do there?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Casper's colleague. I have to endure him on a weekly basis. I'm Matt Solomon. I'm originally from the UK, as you can probably tell by the voice. So I moved to the Netherlands in 2015, I think it was. I did a degree and a master's and traveled for a little bit and met what is now my wife. And basically we said, we'll move to the first place where someone gets a job. And she got a job first in her field. And so for me, it was like, right, I'll get over there and have an adventure. I did an internship with Vitesse Arnhem, that's a professional football team, soccer. Then moved on to a professional team in Dubai, worked there for a year, came back and interned with the Olympic team. And since that internship, I've been employed as a strength and conditioning coach. I'm a full-time strength and conditioning coach, and through that time, worked with a range of different sports, but now it's purely Paralympic sports. So that's wheelchair basketball, that's para ski, para snowboard, para table tennis, para badminton, para cycling.
Dude, that's a lot of damn sports to have on your plate.
That's a lot of stuff, mate. To give you like a week caption, right? So obviously they've all got sessions throughout the week. I think I added up there something like 42 Paralympic athletes who are training internally. So like we'll see them on a weekly basis. I'll see them on a weekly basis. I'm going to do the strength and conditioning sessions for them and also the sports science for wheelchair basketball. So that's low monitoring, heart rate stuff. We've just got a new LPM system in. So it's a busy week when you combine that with a couple of other things. Like there's a lot of stuff going on. So it's good fun, lots of stuff to do. But like I said, there's a lot of different balls to juggle at the same time.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so today's topic, we want to run into adaptive athlete training. So if anyone is listening and are not quite sure, Matt's already talked about he was with Paralympic athletes, but we're going to dive into some of the differences. I know it's probably not such a popular topic, but I know there are coaches out there that work with adaptive athletes, or maybe there's some adaptive athletes that might find this and listen. So Matt, do you want to just maybe dive into what adaptive, or what it means to be an adaptive athlete, kind of define that for anyone listening?
Yeah, so you've got the Olympics, which everyone knows about, and then the Paralympics, which everyone also knows about and potentially sees a little bit less of because it's less mainstream. There's less media coverage. Basically, Paralympics is an Olympic event for people with disability. So the term adaptive comes from a place where not everything has to be disability, you just adapt what you're doing. So for example, a squat could be a unilateral squat for a person with a singular amputation. So adapting refers to what you're doing in the day-to-day, and it's just a bit more of a respectful term without putting disability first. So that comes into some language stuff, able-bodied, for example, as opposed to you hear a lot of people making mistakes on things like normal. Well, everyone's normal or not normal. I know a lot of people who aren't normal, but they're not disabled. So able-bodied, for example. And I even correct my athletes on some of this stuff as well, because if they don't do it, then they're going to give that message to other people too. So it basically means that it's a person first. So we use person first language as much as possible. It's person, then disability, and preferably not disability as a descriptor. But it's person first language. It's a person who is going to have an adapted training schedule. And that can mean an adapted sport, for example, using a wheelchair to move. It could mean having some kind of, what's the word? Use some kind of prosthetic. That's the word.
Yeah.
I was trying to use difficult words. Some kind of prosthetic, for example, to complete the sport or to use in daily life. So that encompasses a lot of different people, and the different types of disability you see is huge, right? So you can kind of get an idea of someone who, let's say, a person has had a single leg amputation, then you kind of get the idea that all the other parts of the body are usable, potentially apart from that one leg, and even that one leg to the point that it's amputated is potentially usable. So let's take someone who's had an above the knee amputation. The hip's still usable. It might be slightly atrophied. There might be other kind of things going on at that hip, but it's still usable potentially. So I think that's an important starting point to work from, is to look at what's possible. And that's often a lot. And this is obviously, I'm going to try and refer back to, throughout this entire podcast, what people can learn from that. So if you're going to have an injury, let's say you've got an injury to your lower leg, it doesn't mean that that entire limb is off limits. It means potentially that your ankle is off limits, but your knee and your hip still are available to train. So it's just a case of finding ways to adapt exercises or get the adaptation that you want for as many parts of the body as possible, without either, in that injury situation, without doing some damage to the injury, or in the example of an adaptive athlete, while allowing for the fact that some things can't be the same.
Actually, a recent news piece came out from New Zealand, must have been last week or the week before, that's quite fitting for this. It's the first blind jiu-jitsu player to get his black belt. And
that's cool.
I think it was in New Zealand. Yeah, so it shows what's possible there. Obviously, there are limitations, but things can be done.
Absolutely. And I think it's nice to see those stories as well, where you're like, you know what, like, you don't have to put those limitations on yourself, because a lot of things come from society. Like, people tell athletes, oh yeah, well, you can't do this, especially doctors, medical professionals, and we're like, oh, you're dangerous, and your mum comes in and it's like, oh, you shouldn't do that, it's dangerous for you. And I work with a guy who was flat out, like, his WhatsApp profile picture is him on a half pipe in his wheelchair, and he just goes off of it. And like,
oh my gosh,
you can't do this on a half pipe, he just goes off of it. So like, you kind of get that idea for what is actually dangerous. And like, I don't recommend that people go do that. That's not necessarily intelligent, but like, it's just an example of what's actually dangerous, and what's perceived as dangerous, and what's possible and what's perceived as not possible. And I think when you start to explore the boundaries of what people are telling you can do, you can often see that it's not even close to what is possible.
Yeah, I know there's different categories for adaptive athletes, and you probably work with a range of them, like the visual impairments, the amputees and stuff like that. So this might be more of a general question, but I guess what kind of principles or guidelines kind of guide or do you follow when training these kinds of athletes that kind of lets you get the most out of them, that people can essentially apply whether they're an adaptive athlete or not?
So I think probably the best way to describe it is to take you through the process a little bit. So there's a lot of stuff that I'd like to touch on: standard principles, progressive overload, looking for an adaptation as opposed to exercises, like the obvious stuff that almost all S&C professionals are doing. And next to that, there's a huge like mental side of it, where you're going to try and remove those barriers that we talked about. You're going to try and convince them of what is possible and challenge them in a way which is going to get the best out of them. So to take you through how you might go about doing that, you're gonna get an athlete who comes in, and day one, hopefully they've had a medical screening and seen a physio. Let's assume that's the case, and you've got that information. So you're gonna get that information. You're like, okay, this is Steve. He's gonna do A, B, and C. Like, these are the things I need to look out for. This is his history. I've got a reasonable idea of what's possible for Steve at this moment. Comes in. Either you throw that out the window immediately, or you didn't even have it. So I like to work pragmatically, where I'm like, okay, I've got an idea of roughly the movement patterns which I want to hit, especially for an athlete who's just coming in, basic level athlete. They probably don't have a huge movement library. So they're going to come in and be like, right, I want you to, for example, squat, hinge, push, pull, vertically, horizontally, rotate, brace, whatever. And I'm just going to, for that person, find potential exercises. So let's say that your most basic squat is a goblet squat, and you're going to go, right, shall we try a goblet squat? Like, obviously the warm up, whatever. Goblet squat, cool. So you give them a light weight and you say, all right, okay, do this, demonstrate the exercise. They do the exercise, and immediately you can see some stuff which is potentially different. So Let's say that there's a person who has cerebral palsy and they have really high muscle tone in their ankle, the calf, for example. Then you can see that that's a limitation. So that mobility isn't there. That knee doesn't travel forwards like you want it to. The heel raises, and you're kind of like in a standard scenario for an able-bodied athlete. That's a contraindication. We might not want that in our squat. So in that case, you start asking the question to yourself, right? Okay, is this something that I can improve? Is it something that I can improve now quickly, or do I need to adapt the exercise? So if I can improve it with a cue or a different exercise, then that's kind of easy. But potentially that's not the case, right? So you're kind of like, oh, okay, well, maybe we want to work on it long term, and we accept that this isn't the right squat for you right now. So let's say we put wedges under the heels, and we say, right, do the goblet squat again. And now all of the physical parameters, the technical stuff which you want to see, that straight back, below parallel, whatever your squat KPIs are, they can hit that with that one simple adaptation. So basically they'll come in, and I'll do that for all of the exercises that I think are reasonable on that day. Let's say there's 8 exercises in the movement patterns that we've just listed, and we'll just take it as an exercise by exercise basis, and we'll go, right, this is possible, this is not possible, and we start to build out that exercise library. Session 2, depending on cognitive abilities of the athlete, maybe they do some different variations. So you might, instead of doing a dumbbell bench press, you do a barbell bench press, and we see how they can control that bilaterally. So you could progress it that way. You could also just say, you know what, like, I want to work on that mental side. I want to teach you to train. So I don't want to be worrying about the technique of everything all the time. I want you to come in, I want you to look at your program, recognize the exercises, and just be able to repeat those next week. So that depends highly on the cognitive side of things. And the example I mentioned with CP, things which you take for granted in an able-bodied athlete might not be the case. So we know that with cerebral palsy, there's some organizational skills which might be lacking. In fact, there's a huge list of stuff which might be going on cognitively, which we're not aware about. So it's really important to know how that athlete wants to be talked to, how they best communicate, and that could be down to there's a neuropsychological research center which we send some athletes to, we think is necessary, and we'll get our report back, and they're like, this person, they can't work visually, they just can't see stuff in their mind. So as an example of a head coach this week, it was like, I was taking an athlete and we were going to do like the course recognition. So we're going to go on a bike, and we're going to go, we turn left and we go right, and we're going to like learn the course before the race the next day. And the athlete just couldn't retain it. Like, did it 2 or 3 times and had no idea what was going on. And the coach was like, what's going on? And then afterwards, after that investigation, they're like, they can't learn using visual stimuli. They need to hear it. They need it written down or audible. And with that in mind, obviously that person, then you communicate entirely differently. And now to that person, it's like, right, left, right, long straight, roundabout, whatever. But you're not going to do the whole hour-long, nice little chilled out course or whatever. It's just pointless. There's no need. So back to the story, you're going to come in and you're going to be like, right, we've got a list of exercises that I want to do. We're going to adapt those exercises, and then we're going to teach you how to train. And hopefully along the way, we're going to make you into a better human being. And that training process, that teaching them how to train, can be as simple as you're going to turn up on time, preferably 5 minutes beforehand. You're going to do your warm-up. And I expect you to do that by yourself. Like, in the first couple of weeks, I'll help, but I expect that to be something you can do without me telling you which exercises. So you're going to come in, you're going to do your stuff, then you're going to do the program which is written down for you. You need to learn how to do that, how to move in space, how to deal with all the other people that are in the session, how to adapt the exercises, and eventually the goal is then to start working together to improve that exercise library to the point where I'm like, I think we can get this to be a more specific exercise for you because the head coach says this, the physio says that, you're telling me another thing, and I'm going to put all of these things together to change the way that you squat so that we can get a more specific joint angle, contraction mode, whatever, like go through Verkhoshansky's 5 things. Go through all of that and make a more specific exercise. So you go from that, we're just going to do movement patterns, through to specific for that individual and for their sport. And in doing that, you come across these barriers. And the first one that you always get, and that's the one that I hate the most, is I can't do that. So on that day one, really conscious of the moment that comes, and it's going to come. I know it's going to come. It might even come in the first exercise where you're like, oh, I can't do that. I'm like, you can't do it in the same way that I would do it, maybe, but that doesn't mean you can't do it. We're going to adapt the exercise, and I'm going to give you a way to do that. So really simply think about the squat there that we mentioned. Like, maybe you can't do the squat in the exact way that I just demonstrated, but with wedges, it's all easy. So with that in mind, we kind of try and stamp that out as quickly as possible, change that mentality from I can't, I'm limited, it's not possible, through to, okay, with some small adaptations, I can actually achieve a lot more, both in my training session and potentially outside of it as well.
I think what might also be useful for people listening, I know, so obviously at your Papendale facility, I know I've been there as well, and it's damn nice. You've got a billion gyms in there and a lot of space. And I think you almost have, you have the privilege of having almost a gym to yourself to be able to do this. Now, I know you've talked to me about traveling and having to train in gym, I guess, I don't know if they're commercial gyms or just gyms with other teams and people. Now, I'm sure a lot of people listening maybe have adaptive athletes or are an adaptive athlete that can only train in maybe a commercial gym. It's filled with people using all sorts of different equipment. So I guess, do you have any advice or guidelines in that situation where, hey, you go into the gym, but you might not have easy access to whatever it is you need? You need to, again, adapt your training session because of the environment you're in.
I think it's probably quite similar to if I was to go to a general gym, I have to wait 10 minutes for the squat rack, and I'm like, oh, yeah, now I've got to do something different. I mean, it's not too dissimilar. I think what's crucial then is that exercise library that we discussed is broad enough, and either there's a coach with, or the athlete themselves understands the exercises well enough so that they can adapt that themselves. So let's say, for example, you're in a commercial gym, bench press is full of guys who are just trying to bench press as much as possible.
Doing half reps.
It's horrible. Half reps, horrible technique. You know how it is. Monday, bench press day. And your athlete's there and they're like, I'm going to bench more than this person with good technique for more reps. And they can't do that because it's full, whatever. Well, if the athlete has no idea that a dumbbell bench press might also suffice, if they can't do that, potentially a floor press could be an option. And if they can't do that, they could use machines. If they have no concept of that, then that's quite a big issue. So again, it comes back to that exercise library where you're like, if we can teach them a movement pattern, and we can say, let's say our horizontal push in this instance is ideally a bench press. But if they can't do that, then it's a dumbbell bench press. And if they can't do that, then potentially a floor press. Like, you go through that list of ideal scenario, and every step away from that is less ideal, but you're still going to get a stimulus which is comparable, at least, or comes close to what you want. I think that's probably the most essential. So that's an education thing. And that's a given understanding from the head coach or the strength coach for what you're trying to achieve, so the adaptation that you want, and which exercises are potentially suitable for that. If you say, right, I want to achieve speed and power on upper body bench press today, and they're like, right, okay, I'm going to do speed and power, so I'm going to do a dumbbell bench press, but I'm going to throw the dumbbells. I'm like, that's dumb. Don't do that. Right? But like, conceivably, an athlete could apply that methodology and make silly decisions. So I think it's an education thing. It's allowing them to experience as many things as possible within a certain movement pattern in the gym, and accepting the fact that sometimes in that situation it's difficult, just like it is for anyone else to go into the gym and be like, right, it's a busy gym and I've got to share equipment with people. Well, then potentially they have the option to switch up exercises, switch up the order of exercises, or just flat out change the exercise, provided they're able to do that.
Nice. Have you, I guess, I don't know if you would have come across this or it would be applicable, because I guess you work with athletes that are performing their sport. But have you ever come across or experienced or seen like maybe an adaptive, I guess, trainee or athlete that was just so limited there wasn't much they could do at all regarding training?
Not very often. I mean, not that I personally trained this person, but there was one guy who did wheelchair rugby who came in who was severely limited, and that wheelchair rugby is a sport where you have to have some kind of disability on 3 limbs, so like, or 3 parts of your body. So like you're really limited. And because of that level of disability which is required as an entry to the sport, the person came in, and it wasn't my athlete, but I was like, shit, this is tough. Like, there's a limited amount of stuff you can do. You've got like a glove which allows you to grip and pull stuff, but there's not a lot going on there. So for me personally, I'm fortunate that the majority of the people I work with have probably less severe disabilities than a lot of people who would then potentially be at home. Obviously, being in a privileged situation, you see the best of the best, the most able, and those people are selected because they are able for their disability. And I've not yet come across people who are severely unable to do a lot of things. And even the people who are slightly less able to do stuff, you're still able to challenge them, right? So, I mean, there's an athlete I work with who she's a double leg amputee above the knee and a single arm amputee below the elbow, just below the elbow. So that's a lot of not being able to do stuff, but we can still do a pretty comprehensive program.
Yeah, do you want to run through that program?
Lots of pushing and pulling. Push, pull, vertical, horizontal.
How are you doing the push and pull, obviously, because it's one hand, right?
So we'll do a single arm dumbbell press. But because that person has a prosthetic, and it's something that they got relatively recently. So initially it was just single arm double bench press. And for this side, it will be like a fly inwards. But because they have a prosthetic, we can now build up a little bit of weight and do some kind of dumbbell press semi-symmetrically. So that's possible. The same goes for shoulder pressing, similar idea. Pull downs, similar idea. So you can see for those kind of big movement patterns that's all possible. Legs, initially it was a lot on cables, so adduction, abduction, extension, flexion, like just standard stuff. But we can do a hip thrust. Like, it's just short levers, so you accept that that's different. So it's kind of like imagine a reverse plank from above the knee.
Gotcha.
So hip thrust is possible. There's way more than you initially expect, and obviously we worked together for a while now. And a couple of months ago, she has the prosthetic, and I was like, cool. We're going to do, as a group, who can hang on the bar for the longest, because that's a fun little game. But like, if you get them to select teams and you have different disability levels within the group, they all select the biggest, strongest guy in this case first. Like, he's the go-to guy. I'm like, that guy's going to fail horribly at hanging for a long time. He's big and strong, he's just too heavy. So you get like that kind of mental challenge of, we're going to select the team that we think is the biggest and strongest, and then actually it's the team that was the smallest. They were able to hang the longest. So anyway, that aside, this athlete was put into a team, and they were like, I can hang here with my prosthetic, just chilling out. And I'm like, oh, cool. Can you do some chin-ups? And 1 and a bit was possible, but I'm like, that's super impressive. So we can train that, and then since then we've been training hanging, press up, pull-ups, that kind of stuff. So
nice.
You can get an idea of, initially it seems like you really can't do that much, to the point where like you're kind of like, oh shit, what do I do? And then when you get into it and you work with a person and you get that basic program and you keep working with that person, you're like, how can we further train your legs? Last week, they had to replace an exercise. Like I said, look, this is your program, brilliant. I believe in the program. You need to replace an exercise. I don't care what it is. It just can't be the first 4 big ones, but like the accessory exercises, you need to replace one. And they're like, oh yeah, cool. And the athlete just said, I'm going to do step-ups. I'm like, you're going to do step-ups? Yeah, crack on. I had no idea what she was going to do. But like, got this little box, stepped up onto it, and like with a big kind of body movement, got up there, stood up, back down again. I was like, brilliant.
There you go.
Yeah, it's not as difficult as you kind of think. And a lot of the stuff they've already done already because they have to like overcome these challenges in daily life. So, yeah, I mean, it's not reinventing the wheel. It's giving them the opportunity to express movement in whatever way they can. And then it's my job as a coach to then pick up on that and be like, yeah, that's the thing we can use. Or maybe if you modify this, we can get this adaptation, which is something that I didn't necessarily expect.
Yeah, there's a lot of good lessons as well that can be applied to able-bodied training. And I think one interesting point might be the idea of training one side and becoming too imbalanced. I know people, maybe they injure their leg or their arm and they won't train the other side for the fear of, hey, I'm going to make this side too big or too strong or whatever. And when I come back, I'm going to have this big imbalance between my injured side and not injured side. Obviously, you have athletes that literally can only train one side properly. So do you want to maybe dive into a little bit of that and be like, okay, is this something that people should really worry about? Is there such a big discrepancy between sides when you're training one side chronically because maybe you've injured the other side?
I get where that comes from, right? It probably comes from bilateral sports. For example, running, despite being unilateral, you're going to do 2 things. So let's call that bilateral sport. So yeah, I get in some situations that you want that evenness, but like I've had athletes come to me like, "Oh, I'm wonky. Like I don't want to be more wonky." I'm like, "Yeah, well, yeah, but like, they're like, I'm wonky. I don't want to be more wonky if I train that side." I'm like, "Cool, you're already wonky, mate. Like,
you can't get any worse."
Like, yeah, like you can get more wonky, but like, is that a bad thing? And it's very difficult to say to someone that if you let's say left, right. It's my left.
Yeah.
If you're here, left is stronger than right, and you want to be stronger because it's going to make you more robust. You're going to move both of these things up. Now, in a normal situation, you might want this. For an adaptive athlete, you might go, this one has this potential and this one has this potential. But then you have like a huge discrepancy, a larger discrepancy. And the question is, do you want more absolute strength and therefore like some kind of robustness, some kind of ability to load? Or do you want symmetry? And until now, I've come across one athlete where we've gone, we want more symmetry. And that's a cycling athlete because obviously it's a cyclical sport. And on one leg, we've kind of got to the point where like we can make you stronger, but if you're an endurance athlete, we don't need to make you that much stronger.
Yeah.
And in that situation, we've had a conversation with the head coach, and the head coach is like, you know what, that leg's cool. Don't make it weaker. Keep it as it is. Loads of focus on the other leg. So in my view, I'd rather have higher absolute values of strength and therefore a larger discrepancy in limb symmetry than a really nice semi-symmetrical, but let's say symmetrical situation where they're weak. Like if you're weak as piss, you're going to get injured. If you get injured, you can't do your sport. Like I would rather have someone who has an imbalance of, let's say, 30 to 40%, but is as strong as possible on both limbs. And therefore that gives them the opportunity to train more, and that gives them the opportunity to perform their sport at higher intensities without getting injured. If they can do both of those things, so the volume goes up, the intensity goes up, and we can coordinate that limb better because of increased muscle mass, increased strength, whatever, increased training time, then they'll all win. So if it's not that direct performance, like stronger, better coordinated, faster, powerful to performance, it could be that indirect, you're going to train more, and therefore if you can train more efficiently, higher intensities, better coordination, then yeah, that's a win as well. So for me, although there might be research conflicting that, I'm kind of sat there going, it's the world we live in where you're going to be a bit wonky. So we're gonna lean into it, and I'd rather be strong and wonky than weak and wonky.
Yeah, I think what's often not publicized as much is there's really good research, obviously, around training the uninjured limb to help speed the healing of the injured limb. Obviously, I can't remember the bloody term they use. It's some crossover effect.
But bilateral transfer or something?
Ah, man, it's been a while. It's been a while since I've dove into that research, but obviously training one side can help speed up the healing and recovery of the other side. Obviously, training your non-injured side can also strengthen the other side too, so you've got those benefits. So yeah, I'm with you, and I don't, for anyone who's maybe suffering from some kind of limb injury where they can't strength train that side, 100% strength train the other side. You're not going to, in my opinion, you're not going to develop enough strength and size in the time you're injured on the other side to make a huge difference in terms of like a asymmetry. And even if you do, when that limb comes back, you're going to, as you start to train that side, you can always prioritize that one side too, or, you know, whatever it is you need to do, and it will come back pretty quick.
Yeah, agreed. I think, again, if one side is bigger, well, it's fine. I don't know if anyone's seen Rafa Nadal's left arm.
Oh, yeah.
Like, that guy has one huge left arm, and then one arm you're like, oh, well, it doesn't look the same. It's logical. It's a sport. So,
yeah.
I mean, when you put it into context, I think there's huge examples throughout the sporting world where it's not the case that everything is perfectly 50-50. And if you were to get one arm or leg or whatever bigger than the other, that's cool. Deal with the fact that this is stronger later. Like, that's not, strength is never a weakness. It might be if you're then unstable or whatever. But like, if you got stronger this side, and this side is the same, then you can always train this side extra. Like, no one's gonna die from training a little bit more on one side. So I think it's probably blown out of proportion for a lot of athletes. I think there might be some research available in some specific scenarios where you want as much symmetry as possible. Brilliant. If that's the case in your sport, crack on, go for it. I mentioned an example where it might have been earlier. But I think for most of people in the scenarios that I work in, it's just not attainable. And therefore, as long as the physios I'm working with aren't losing their absolute shit over it, or the head coach, then I'm kind of like, crack on.
Yeah, and asymmetry is not always the devil it seemed to be. As you mentioned, obviously in your cyclical sport like cycling, it's a little different because you kind of want even power outputs on each pedal to maximize cycling performance. But for rotational sports, baseball, I mean, even judo to some extent, you might have a favorite side you like to throw on or a favorite side you like to grip. Obviously, striking sports, you're going to probably have a preferred stance and things like that. And these are all going to create asymmetry. If you spend too long trying to correct an asymmetry, you may see performance reductions in your normal, whatever it is, stance or thing. So I think baseball, you swing one side, then you try and bring up the other side to even it out, then you might run into some issues performance-wise. And you probably won't see that huge, injury. Man, I hate that, but injury prevention. I still see it everywhere, man. It's still going on.
It's not my fault, mate. I'm not saying that. Yeah.
You're the one debunking it all on Instagram.
No, I don't actively sit there and, I'm not going to call out physios or whatever. I'm tempted sometimes, but I'm not going to sit there and do that.
No, all good. No, I think we covered pretty much everything to do, well, at least the questions I had with adaptive athletes. Is there anything you wanted to add regarding the adaptive side? I know you've got far more experience than I do in that area.
I think probably touching on how to adapt exercises quickly. So
yeah, go for it.
Something that I enjoy. I don't want to say I'm good at it, but I'm probably better than I was a couple of years ago at it through these scenarios and situations. So I think it's important to realize where you can adapt exercises, and then how to do that, right? So I'm putting up a slide, and I'm going to have to translate it from Dutch as I go. But I did a presentation a few weeks back for physios, and basically I tried to think of all the stuff which I do to adapt exercises, and variables could be like stability. So let's say a person has an asymmetry and stability on one side is less. Like, how do you add stability to an exercise to create force? Obviously, there's a continuum from stability and force. So, for example, if you're going to do a hand-assisted split squat, potentially with a safety bar, half foot squat, whatever you want to call it, you could do way more in terms of load and therefore get a really positive adaptation. So obviously, like the loading itself, where how much load you're going to do, that plays into it. The load position, so left arm, right arm, back, front, that can have a huge impact on the levers which you're going to use and therefore technique. So for example, front loading a squat is generally way easier than loading a squat on the back in terms of technique, and especially for learning. So how does that work? Let's say a person does have limb asymmetry, where you position the load left arm, right arm, could have a huge impact. If that person doesn't have good grip strength in an arm, can also have huge impact. So you have to appreciate the fact that if you only load on one arm, what's that going to do to the other side of the body? Mobility, something we covered earlier. So for example, ankle mobility, that could be something that you want to work on as a target to improve, but accept in the meantime that you do want to get some kind of learning and load in, so therefore you're going to make allowances for that. Range of movement, I work with an athlete who just has limited range of movement, and although I'd love for that person to squat deeper, it's not possible. Like, we can do it, and then he breaks, and I get an angry head coach and an angry athlete. It's not worth it. So we created an environment where that person feels safe to exercise and make the most out of their training by limiting the range of movement and building the load up, because obviously you have a higher potential to produce load in a shorter range. So you can adapt that range of movement to suit the athlete or the
So you just do
exercise.
a high box squat for that?
We don't even do the box. So I just say squat to the depth which you find.
Yes.
Okay, and it's just above parallel, and we'll do, for example, a leg press, and he just won't go that deep on it.
Dude, that's how most rugby players squat anyway.
Exactly. So like, what we're worrying that much about, and when it comes to range of movement, just accept that I would love for that person to have a really deep squat position, but it hurts.
Yeah,
and that's going to reduce the performance for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So why are we going to do it?
And it's a powerlifting standard.
Yeah, exactly. It's not an adaptation. Like, again, so at the start you said, what the principles you're using? Yeah, it's adaptations over exercises. We're looking for an adaptation which makes them better in the sport, and not to do a back squat because that's what everyone tells us to do. So range of movement is one. Coordination is another one. You can get Franz Bocci if you want, but like the exercise coordination, the order of muscle recruitment, the kinetic chain, how you link that together, that can all be used as different type of exercise. Like, how does that person's technical ability or any type of disability that might have influenced their coordination, and can we improve that? So for example, an athlete with CP who has really high muscle tone and potentially has muscle spasms when doing exercise, how do we do a coordinative movement? Because when that exercise complexity increases, that's when the spasms come. So even higher muscle tone, and therefore not the coordinated movement you want. So how do we change coordination or make it easier, more difficult, whatever, to get the adaptation that we want? And lastly, like equipment use. So obviously there's loads of adaptive equipment out there, and I think a lot of it probably comes from the powerlifting world, where they're just trying to find different ways to do the exercises without getting too much monotony. And there's a huge range of stuff that people can use to adapt exercises. Even the last 2 or 3 weeks, we've got a couple of extra different bars in the gym. There's like a landmine attachment, and you've got neutral grip, you've got loads of stuff going on.
Viking
something like that. A couple of months ago, we've got a Swiss bar, brilliant.
Nice.
So it's like a neutral grip bench press type thing. There's loads of options. So I think just having a little surf of like specialty equipment, specialty bars, specialty grip attachments, that can go a long way to adapting your exercises as well. So with those things as a list of, it's a basic list, but it gives you some kind of structure where you can pretty much put an exercise in where you're like, I wanted to do a back squat, and you're like, okay, mobility is a thing. All right, mobility is a thing. We're going to need to potentially use some kind of wedge on the heel. If coordination is a thing, then we want to keep that really simple. We don't want to do some Bulgarian split squat with a black bag over your head because it's all going to go wrong. We're going to keep it as simple as possible. So we're going to do, in that case, a goblet squat, whatever, with wedged heels. So with those things in mind, you can use that list as a kind of a go-to of how am I going to adapt that one first thing, what I would like to have, and what comes out the other end for the athlete in front of you.
I think that equipment thing is hugely overlooked because, I mean, most sports training is influenced heavily from the strength sports world, you know, weightlifting, powerlifting, bodybuilding, etc. And obviously the barbell is the competitive piece of equipment, and it's what they train on most, and that's what most people train on most. But man, you can do so much more and like work around so many different issues when you just don't have to use a barbell for everything. You know, safety squat bars, Swiss bars, cambered bars, buffalo bars, all make things nicer on your shoulders. In fact, all those pieces of equipment are basically for your shoulders. And then you've got obviously fat bar. Man, I love the fat bar. And there's just so much you can do with different pieces of equipment that you don't just need to. Obviously, it's a bit more money to have all those bars if you're training in your home, whatever. But I mean, those investments, if you're training for something competitive, I think those are good investments too.
I think it could separate you as well if you're a facility and you're like, you know what, like, how are we going to separate ourselves from someone else? Like, if let's say you buy 3 speciality bars and a standard gym has a barbell, done. And you're like, cool, we got 3 speciality. Like, you've literally given all of your clients hundreds of potential new exercises. And if you can alert them to that, then obviously you increase your value. So I think there's something to be said for gyms looking outside of the box from, cool, we've got another machine or another treadmill and it does the latest thing, to can we seriously increase the number of exercise options for our clients? Definitely.
Yeah, for sure.
And one last one before you cut me off and tell me to bugger off. No, I think probably the biggest thing that I would want to give people from working with adaptive athletes is not only the fact it's brilliant that people should do it because it's challenging and fun, but the fact that you have to work together on stuff. And I don't know that athlete's body like they know their body. So I pretty much come in with like physiological stuff, and I want this adaptation, and physiology is this, and these exercises, and I can adapt it using these methods like I've discussed. But the athlete, they've probably done a lot of it before. Like, even if it's not in a gym setting, like, they've tried lots of stuff because it's their body, they've tried stuff. And we have to work together to find the solution. So that's for exercises, but also in terms of load monitoring, where potentially I'm looking at the data going, oh, tough week. And I'm not taking into account the fact that tough week is entirely on shoulders because that person uses a wheelchair for their ambulation in life, but also for the sport. So if they're doing everything in a chair and a gym session or 2 and all of their 10 to 12 hours of sport, whatever, like, that's a huge amount of load. So it's that appreciation for the person in front of you, and then talking to them and being like, how do you experience that? Like, how tired are you? What do you think we can do here? Like, how do you feel during that exercise? Do you think we could try A, B, or C? And I think to come back to that story of that person coming in on day 1 and you going through all those things, on that day 1, if you can challenge them, or you can say, can I challenge you on day 1? And they say yes, because they always say yes. And they say yes, you can go so much further. Even if you don't, on day 1, you're like, you know what, this is challenging enough, I'm not going to do that yet. Like, someone comes in and they have a lower limb impairment, whatever it might be. We're just going to do upper body today. I'm not interested in making life really difficult for you. It's an unfamiliar setting, whatever. But next week, can I challenge you to do some leg exercises? Yeah, of course. Cool. And then you leave it, and a week later, you've already got the yes. So you're like, oh, I remember last week when you said, and you get that buy-in. So I think that working together and getting to know the athlete and using that athlete's opinions and thoughts and combining that with your, as a coach in this case, your physiological knowledge, your knowledge of exercise adaptation, load, what you want from that moment in time, that training period. Combining those things will give you the best results, whereby you get an athlete who's maybe 30, 35, and it's just you being some kind of soundboard for them. And you're like with the more advanced athletes that I work with, we either sit and have coffee, or we'll call in and we'll just make a program together. I'm like, cool, this is the plan. Roughly, what do you want to do? Like, do you want to get rid of this exercise? Do you want to change this? You said that your shoulder was a little bit grumpy. What can we do there? And you make this plan together, and the buy-in is huge. The athlete gets a better program. They do the program as opposed to being like, oh, I don't want to do that. And you get this better working relationship. So I think if that's one thing that I would definitely take from that group of athletes, is how to work together to make the program instead of just going, right, this is your program.
I can imagine another good way for buy-in is if you got into, for example, the wheelchair athletes, if you got into the wheelchair and jumped into some of the training sessions, have you done a bit of that to see what it's like?
I've not sat in a wheelchair. I was tempted to do like a couple of hours just to see what it was like, but then I didn't want to get loads of questions from people like, what have you done? Or you've broken your leg. But I still actually owe a couple of athletes after losing a bet. It's just a bet. So it sounds like I'm like gambling all the I lost a bet, or whatever. I made a joke. I said, I'll do conditioning in the wheelchair with you guys once. And they just laughed and were like, "You're gonna die." I'm like,
yeah, I can imagine.
So I still owe them that, to be fair. So maybe that's something that needs to be improved on.
Yeah, for sure. No, I mean we covered a shit ton in 45 minutes all on adaptive athletes. But if anyone wants to find you, follow you, see what you're up to, see what you're sharing, where can they do that?
Matt Solomon Strength on Instagram is probably the best place. Obviously, standard stuff, LinkedIn. I have Twitter, but don't bother. No one uses Twitter now. So those places are good. Reach out if you wanna hear more, or ask some questions. You're more than welcome to.
Yeah, and Matt also hosts the Science for Sport podcast as well each week. And you've got a shit ton of episodes on there now. A lot of great coaches too. So if anyone's interested in another podcast more on sports science, there's another one. Yeah,
absolutely. So I think we've just done 141. So
oh my gosh,
this week will be 142. There you go. Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. All good. No, thanks for coming on, Matt. Really appreciate it.
Absolute pleasure, mate. Thank you very much for inviting me.